Dobry wieczór.
Dzień dobry.
Okay, I'm obviously here with Nerchio. I'm going to do one of my Grilled interviews with him. The first place I want to start with you, because I've actually done a few interviews with you, working for Team Acer, obviously, and so we've talked about a lot of the most famous things over time. So the first place I want to actually start with you is like the concept of how much time you actually need to practice to be good for a tournament. Because I know a lot of fanboys on Reddit, or Team Liquid or whatever, they hear, okay, so Koreans practice all day long, and they think, right, if you're a pro player and you want to be good, you just have to practice as much as you can, as much time as possible, and that's what you need to be good. And obviously all the pros tell them, no, I'm practicing a lot whenever they win the tournament, and then when they don't win, they say, oh, maybe I didn't get my practice right. They always try to kind of follow that same opinion. But I've spoken to you in the past, and it sounded like you didn't necessarily feel like you had to practice as much as Koreans do, for example. So thinking of your best periods in StarCraft 2, how much do you think on average you practice during those times?
So I think that, it obviously depends on each person, how long they spend time practicing. I think I need to practice a little bit less, and of course there is some players that also don't need to practice as much. I don't know, I will give you an example, like Stefano may be one of them, but so I would say in the past, I don't really let's say enjoy playing custom games or anything like that. So when there was a lot of online cups, I just played them because it's fun to be competitive online as well as offline, but there was many opportunities to do that, so I played pretty much in every tournament online, and there's it's not as rewarding, let's say, to play custom games or just ladder. So I stick to online cups, and there is less of them right now, so it's also less practice for me.
Okay, well, I mean, that's totally different to how I know a lot of players practice who are Europeans or Americans. Like, a lot of them I know just only play the ladder, and then some of them maybe have, especially if they have good teammates, they might have customs against them for the next race they're going to play. So do you think it actually works just to play these online cups? It's not a problem that you might get just random opponents that you might never play again? How does that help you play, do you think?
So I assume that, if I play an online cup, every opponent I will get will try to play his best, obviously, because, I mean, it's still a small online cup, but they'll try their best to win. So even if I get some opponents that also pro gamers that also like to play those online cups, like Happy, for example, he plays a lot of them. So if I meet him, I know he will play his best, and so will I. So it's a good test for you to see how you're doing right now. And also, I think it's better for Zerg than for other races, because for Terran, for example, you can practice really detailed build order. But for Zerg, you need overall gameplay to be prepared for all-ins or, for some different strategies. So I don't think, online cups work as well for other races.
So for Zerg specifically. One of the things I always, my own theory, whenever I saw a lot of the NA players or the EU players who would say, oh no, I have to practice, I didn't get 6 hours a day of practice, so that's why I don't feel like I'm in good shape. I sometimes felt like it wasn't even actually their skills that were the problem. They just needed it for confidence. They needed to feel like they'd won enough games over the past week or something to be confident they're going to win now. Or they needed to feel no, there's nothing I can see now that from an opponent that I won't have seen before. I got that sense when I talked to Kaz, for example. That's why he wants to play so many games, so he thinks that he's seen every single possible build and combination, so he can never be surprised. Do you think it really matters to play a lot of what do you think there's a point at which it is burnout, you play too much? What would you put the top end on how much you should practice if you're a good player?
I don't know. It's actually very hard to say. I mean,
have you ever tried practicing tons and tons?
No, I usually get tired pretty fast, I would say, because I like to take breaks in between games also to not get tired, as you say. But I think Kaz practices a little bit too much. Maybe it even hurts his gameplay a little bit, we can't really say. But yeah, as I said, online cups, this is a long ladder too. This is the only place where you will meet a wide variety of strategies, because everybody is trying to win, so also everybody is trying to surprise you, so they have advantage over you. And so you're prepared for everything, as Kaz, let's say, wants to be prepared for everything, then he ladders a lot as well. So it's very similar to what I use for my practice, let's say.
One thing I always wondered about as to why, like, the opinion that just playing tons of ladder games is, like, the best idea. Because I even know some of the foreigners who go to Korea, that's all they do. They sit there and they just play the Korean ladder all day. The reason why I always wondered why people thought that was so good is because, on one hand, yeah, you can work out really good builds, but they're going to be the builds that in general work versus, like, the most people, because you're practicing versus everyone, basically. Whereas when you actually play a tournament match, you're just playing one guy, and so you need the builds that work best against him. And then on the other hand, the same factor applies, which is because you're going to use the builds that work the most, that's also the one where if your opponent plays on the ladder, he's going to have a good idea, okay, that's his best build that probably works there. So in some ways, it can almost like counteract your play. Like when you play on the ladder, or you play practice, etc., are you someone who like, you will use the same strategies and just try and perfect them, or do you try and have like lots and like secret ones that no one's ever seen that you're going to bring out at the last minute? Like, what's your kind of a mental approach to how you do the practice in that sense?
I do it actually very differently. It depends on the tournament you actually play in, because I think that we can see different results in this tournament than like WCS than in others, because you have time to prepare. So we can, yeah. So we can also say not only Terrans, but people that play more custom games than ladder, I would say, they do better in this tournament because they are used to like different like practice regime. So maybe my fault was to prepare a little bit too broad instead of focusing on single opponents. So, but overall, I would say in StarCraft 2 it's a little bit better to do as I actually do.
In terms of when you play customs, okay, if you do, a lot of people who are fans just assume automatically, okay, so everyone in a team must all play each other, and then, so as a result, we saw this funny Reddit comment the other day that said, you know, Scarlet, the reason she got so good is because Nerchio just played with her once she joined Team Acer. And so people assume, even if Scarlet's on NA, you're practicing with her all the time. If we get MMA, oh, that must be like why you're good versus Terran or something. That's how they're going to think, you know. So in your team and in how you do it, do you actually practice specific customs against your teammates much to prepare?
Sometimes yes, but not very often, because as I said, I think like Scarlet and MMA practice more. It doesn't, well, I don't, because as I said, I have a little bit different approach to that. But if there is a tournament like WCS, it's obviously beneficial to actually use your teammates to prepare for certain strategies.
When you, in terms of your approach to how you come up with your best builds, okay, I know a lot of players, especially if they're foreigners, because every time they're going to face the big Korean, for example, they want to like do something that the Korean wouldn't possibly expect, and so there's a lot of premium put on having like a surprise strategy or something no one's ever seen before. But if you look at a lot of the best players, I always think of how people used to do it in Brood War. So when Flash was the best player in Brood War, it wasn't that you didn't know what he'd do, it's that he would actually, his approach used to be, he'd pick one or two builds, and he'd just play them so many times that he tweaked them a little bit so that in each scenario he could do the same starting build, then it'd be slightly tweaked to what's going to happen next. So if you did something a little bit different, he had a little tweak to go that way. It wasn't thrown off at all. Can you actually do this style in StarCraft 2? Because I know like you played quite a similar macro style in Wings of Liberty. Like you didn't necessarily have such a wide range. Like, can you have this style now?
I think I have that a little bit in my play, but I think it's easier to do actually like with Terran. I would have to think about Protoss, but the first race that comes up to my mind is Terran, because they have, I don't want to call it, maybe the safest like openings. Like versus Zerg, we can say Hellion opening is like used for 2 or 3 years, and they have so many, you know, follow-ups to that. So we can see that actually in StarCraft 2, and I think it's actually possible with every race, because I think that I have something like that a little bit as well.
Okay. You actually played some Brood War, so I want to ask you a few questions that relate StarCraft 2 to Brood War. So one of the questions I had was, since my main period I watched the Brood War was at the end of the game, so the game was very refined and the best players were incredible. A lot of them were really, really good at holding off any cheese or like really early game aggression. Like that was what they used to doing that all the time. Whereas in StarCraft 2, it appears like a lot of the all-ins are very powerful no matter who you are and how good you are. Like it's very difficult to hold it off if you have like a build order loss, etc. Like the wrong opening. Do you get this sense as well?
Yeah, I think it. You know, I think everybody will agree that StarCraft 2 is a little bit based on hard counters, let's say. So, well, if you choose a build and somebody counters you, you will probably die. But there is some, let's say, standard builds that should be safe versus most of the what opponent can throw at you. And we have to also say that there is also, let's say, not random things in the game, but let's say you have to count on your opponent not playing perfectly sometimes. Let's say shooting force field. So not everything depends on you. And I think in StarCraft 1, actually you could, if you were like the best of the best, you could control pretty much 100% of the game.
Another thing I wanted to ask about, okay, so since everyone spends all their time complaining about balance, no matter what race they play, or trying to argue if it's not balanced, etc., in terms of actual units, usually the things at the moment that people complain is imbalanced. They don't say like, I think this race doesn't work in a certain way. They'll say like, I think this one unit is too powerful. That's what they always, it's always that it's too powerful, you know. It's never that something else is not powerful enough to counter it, you know. In terms of my approach, like how I like to see games played, in general, I actually think that it's good to have powerful units, because then it's really fun to play and it's really exciting and you can do a lot of incredible strategies, but you kind of have to have it's like you have to have a lot of powerful units for every race, and there has to be like a wide variety. So yeah, you have a powerful unit here, but then I have 2 or 3 different things I could potentially do to counter it, you know. The problem is when I've only got one counter and I didn't do that tech path or something, you know, because then I just automatically lose the game. So what I want to ask is, like, are you someone who thinks that like certain units are too powerful in StarCraft 2? Like, what do you think of this approach to like kind of buffing other things instead of just always nerfing the most powerful? I mean, which do you prefer?
Maybe it's the correct way is, you know, buffing the weaker units, but it's always hard to say which one you should actually, you know, make stronger, because, well, let's say somebody plays Immortals versus you, so what actually unit you should do versus that. I mean, there are some that can like beat Immortals very easily. So should you make like all the other units more powerful as well, so they also can beat Immortals? It's hard to say actually. So, I mean, StarCraft Brood War was a little bit like, there was many powerful units. I think that there is also many powerful units in StarCraft 2. I don't know, I would say like Sentry. But I don't agree with how Blizzard approaches the game and tries to fix that, because powerful units should be like that when that opponent can do something about it to, let's say, stop the unit from being powerful.
Like,
and
give me an example. What do you think?
Like right now, you know, let's say there's choke point. Sure, I can avoid it, but if somebody has force fields, even if I'm like 10 times better player, I cannot do much about it. Like I cannot attack into that for some time. So I don't think it's you know, the best, like the unit design kind of, that you cannot prevent it pretty much. And it happens to be that you know, force fields are used, I mean, pretty much all game long versus Zerg and Terran, I guess.
One of the problems that I've noticed StarCraft 2 has always seemed to have, and it seems like it likely always will, is that in terms of macro, you can have big macro games, but people tend to max out very quickly in comparison to Brood War, you know. In Brood War, even if you went to a really long macro game, it was like a very gradual, there were sort of levels to it, like, okay, I've taken my third, now when's he going to take his third, and can I stop him doing that? It was like a gradual thing of building up. Whereas here, macro tends to be when, like, either an early attack just fails and the other guy doesn't attack, or you both just sit back and max up to 200, 200, then you just clash with the big armies. It's sort of still one big fight instead of like a back and forth war. Is it just the way the game's designed? Could they fix something to make longer games and make games where people have like 4 or 5 bases versus each other?
There was some like topic on Team Liquid where they tried to limit the amount of minerals at each base. I think it's like 8 now, and they wanted to make it 6. So the game would be slower overall, and you would have to take more bases to, let's say, max out your economy. Right now, it's the most beneficial thing for like Terran and Protoss, maybe a little bit less for Zerg, is to take 3 bases and like, I don't know, from 60 to 80 workers. And the game is also a little bit, you know, different because of the mechanics. Like Zerg has larva inject, so you can make a lot of drones quickly. Meanwhile, Terran has mules, so late game they can sacrifice their economy to have like pretty much 200 of only army and workers that don't cost supply. So yeah, I would say maybe they should try to use the 6 minerals. I think it would be interesting for pro gamers to try that as well, because right now free base is obviously like the most powerful kind of play.
Now that it's been quite a few months since Wings of Liberty, okay, we've seen all the differences in Heart of the Swarm. I've seen a lot of Zerg players say now, okay, yeah, I actually can see now in Heart of the Swarm that actually maybe the Investor was a bit too powerful in certain areas in Wings of Liberty. Along those lines, now that we're so far away and we're not ever going to play Wings of Liberty again, if you could go back in time now and fix Wings of Liberty, like what are the few things that you would fix to make the game balanced for everyone? Like what do you think would have improved it?
I don't want to say like something could be more balanced. I would say something could be more like well designed, because I agree. I didn't like Infestor as well because it's a silly like spell that you can instantly lock units, and your opponent cannot like accept pre-splits. They cannot do anything after you use your like fungal. And it's the same with force field. Like you cannot really stop it in any way unless you are like, very very close to your opponent's army. And if they're not like asleep, they will always use them at the correct time. I think Terran. Like I agree that with some people that Terran is probably the most well-designed race, because there is not many like units that your opponent cannot do much about, I guess. Yeah, I don't think I can come up with any like game-breaking units or spells for Terran. But yeah, Fungal was a little bit stupid, and so are force fields. So I don't agree with Blizzard adding Mothership Core to the Heart of the Swarm, because it's a unit that Zerg cannot do much about for like first 10 minutes of the game. You don't have anti-air on the field. And so you also cannot do much before you kill the, of course, Mothership Core about Time Wars or Recall actually. So I don't really like it.
Okay, so one other topic that I was thinking about in relation to the two games, Brood War and StarCraft 2, one of the biggest complaints that I thought was a very well put forward complaint, but it never got listened to because people were always just arguing about one little unit and should that be buffed or nerfed, was that one of the biggest problems StarCraft 2 has is that not only are spells very powerful, but in general spells are very easy to cast as well because of the smart casting, and also just because like some of them like lock units or they just have quite a large effect on the game. And so I know some players complained in Wings of Liberty that it kind of made the game all about using whatever spell your race had. It's particularly like the Protoss and the Zerg. Do you think this has changed with Heart of the Swarm? Has it moved away from using spells as much and abusing them?
Well, obviously it changed a little bit for Zerg because they changed the fungal, how it works. But I think that, well, on one hand, Protoss can use, doesn't rely on like force field as much as it was before. But they can also, like, along with Mothership Core and Sentries, they can make the game even more powerful than it was. So, yeah, at the same time, if they don't want to, they don't have to use as much like force fields, let's say. And on the other hand, they can use it even more to get bigger advantage.
Right. One thing I want to talk about actually is the concept of like balanced wine. Okay, because there's a lot of people who. It's understandable why a lot of fans get mad if players complain, okay, this is imbalanced, or especially if it's against their race, obviously, because they feel like it's just complaining that you're losing, right? And it's true, there's obvious cases where some players do that, like really they're just frustrated, they just lost a match. It's not necessarily that one thing's imbalanced. But at the same time, I think part of why pros, when I talk to them about this topic, get a bit annoyed is because what's happening is the fan might be considering things just on his level of that he sees in the game and what he understands from what he sees, or when they play on the ladder at like, well, let's just say bronze or gold or whatever they're at, whatever level. And so it might be imbalanced at their level or balanced at their level, but it might not be. It might be different at the pro level. Okay. So the question is, when you say like a real comment, like you're not joking, you actually think like this is imbalanced or this was imbalanced. do you think that you're seeing something different to what the average fan is? Like, is there something about being a player where you have a natural sense as to like this doesn't work in this area?
I mean, obviously, it's very different for pros and the fans. I would say we have to not assume, but we can see that most of the units at the pro level are used like to the top of its ability, let's say. So not all the time. Not of course people are not playing perfectly, but it's close to perfect, and that's enough to judge if something is imbalanced or not. But I don't know. I think we should discuss balance a little bit more. I mean, everybody gets mad or anything when, for example, me, when I state some comments about that. But when I do that, there's really no place to discuss it at the time. So all you can say is, "Oh, this is imbalanced." But of course, I'm not gonna talk for 10 minutes on my Twitter or anything, like 20 posts to talk if something is balanced or not. So I guess I could do that, but I'm not really participating in many like shows. So yeah, I just keep my opinions quite simple.
So then in general, if I asked you what your criteria for something being imbalanced is, like I'm assuming you're basing it off you've played a lot of ladder games or you've played a lot versus that race, and that's the one thing you come up with, like I can't see any solution to that, or it's going to be too powerful, like even the solutions don't work very often, even if you have the perfect... Are there really things in StarCraft, for example, that even if you see what he's going to do and you prepare perfectly on your end, and like you get the defenses right, it can still be like you can't block it properly, etc.?
Well, as I said, it's mostly like strategies based around force fields on two base, because if it gets to the longer game, the force field is not as important in the game as early game. So from Protoss side, it's mostly like timings around the force field. When even if I, let's say, have like perfect composition to stop something, I still need to rely on my opponent not having perfect force fields. And time warps right now, pretty much.
In terms of, like, okay, so when you're in a tournament, we've seen one of the themes of foreign players is this idea that they either get nervous in like the big match or they get nervous facing a big Korean name. And even if they claim it's not the case, no, I'm confident, I've beaten him before, etc., you can just see it's the case. Like you look on their face or you see them when they lose the game and you're like, oh, actually, he sort of mentally lost that game before he even played it, as well as not being as good. Well, in the Wings of Liberty era, when you were having your good results, people were always praising you because they always used to say, okay, Stefano's the best at like being cool, calm, disciplined, and then they used to list you as well, like because you were winning tournaments. Do you think that you really have some natural aspect that makes this easy for you? Was it something you had learned over time? What do you think of it?
I think there is a few aspects to that. First of all, is I played so many online games. Maybe that even helped me because I played so many tournaments online that I pretty much got used to the feeling that I'm competing against somebody. I can lose and win. On the other hand, maybe people that practice much more have, some expectations to how they will perform at the tournament. And at the same time, I guess I have understanding that the tournament, like the tournament that I'm participating in right now, is not the end of the world. Even if I lose, there is so many more tournaments in front of me. So I don't really pressure myself to win every single game. If I lose, I still know I have more tournaments in front of me.
When people actually think of Heart of the Swarm, okay, like what I wondered was, is it different enough from Wings of Liberty in terms of like every race is different and there's different units that you should really think of it as a totally different game? Like, do you think there still are trends? Like you can sort of tell how good a player was like over the two games? Like what is it? How do you think of it in your mind?
Well, I think it's quite similar actually. I think the matchup that changed most is like PvP and TvT. And besides that, I think it's quite similar. I mean, in ZVT you use bio plus mines, you use tanks before, so it's not a big difference actually. I mean, it plays out differently, but the idea is pretty much the same. So I think we can say that if somebody was good in Wings of Liberty, he will do good Of course, as long as he practices the same amount in Heart of the Swarm.
Okay, I have a good balance question here that I don't think you've heard, and so this is why I want to get your take on it. Okay, so when Zerg was supposedly imbalanced at the end of Wings of Liberty, everyone remembers this period, okay? And the thing they complained about was that if you were a Terran player, you had no chance, because this is the one matchup where you really just couldn't do anything, and you had. And so the theory people used to put about was that, okay, assuming we're not just going to say that every Terran in Europe and North America is trash and that's the reason they lose, assuming some of them are good but they just can't overcome it, well then people could, who are Zergs, could always say, oh well, at least if you look over in Korea, you know, that some of the Terrans there do fine, they still make the finals like MVP, or people like Innovation and Flash were still showing some incredible games. And so then people's counter to that would be to say, oh well, I guess that's because Terran has so much micro in it that if you're incredible at micro, maybe you can overcome the problems. So that was the counter, okay? But here's the problem. Now we come to Heart of the Swarm, and it's the reversed positions, okay? Everyone's saying Terran's the imbalanced one. They just use Hellbats all the time. And so it's Zerg that doesn't have any options as to what to do. And remember, Zerg's supposed to be the race that doesn't require as much micro, etc. Well, here's the problem. In Europe, okay, same thing happening again. People are using the Imba stuff, the Hellbats. They're owning everyone like this. But then we go over to Korea. And remember, the only reason the Korean Terrans were supposed to be able to do it is because they were so incredible at micro. Here's the problem. Over in Korea, we've got all these Zergs doing really well. Like, at the moment, I think 2 of the 4 people in the semi-finals are Zerg. 4 of the people in the round of 8 of GSL were Zerg. And so, what is it that these amazing Zergs are doing over there that's so good? Because I heard an interesting thing from Lucifron today in an interview where he said that he actually thinks the Korean Terrans are easier to play because they don't even use the Hellbat style much. So are these Korean Terrans just idiots? So they're not using this imbalanced unit? What are the Zergs doing to counter it? What do you think?
I think they use a little bit more of Mudas. So like Hellbat drops are not as good as Lucifron like thinks, I guess. But overall they're very strong. I don't want to judge the balance. I'm not actually sure. I think actually ZVT and ZVP was like below 50%, like 45 or something in Korea. I'm not sure. Actually, I'm not even sure if it was Korea, but I think so. So I don't want to say like, you know, there's like 2 Zergs in top 4 GSL. It's like the first GSL where all the players are transferred from Wings of Liberty. So I want to wait a little bit longer to really judge if something is like imbalanced or not. But what I noticed is that most of the Zergs in Korea use early game or mid game timings, and it very rarely gets to late game versus like Terrans. So I think they understand that Zerg is weaker than Terran without getting like a huge advantage going into the late game. So they either try to get the advantage early mid game or they try to finish the game early mid game.
Okay, so along the lines of the same answer and same question there, so I think that's part of why people would give extra credit at the ends of Wing of Liberty to a really, really good Korean Terran. So think of MVP, for example, where he could still make the GSL finals like twice during the Zerg era, and then there's obviously Innovation and Flash had some good foreign or GSL performances, and so people thought, oh, these guys must be really incredible then if Zerg's like more overpowered at the time. So if we go vice versa then, and we say here now, when the Zergs are supposed to be underpowered, does that give you some sort of special appreciation for like Lenok or Life or something? I mean, Life has like an insane winning rate considering supposedly Terrans like imbalanced in that matchup. What do you think of it when you see these guys and what they can do?
Well, as I said, I think they mostly rely right now on early mid-game timings, and I want to see really like the full range of strategies and that Zerg can use against Terran to win not only early game but also late game. And I mean, people forget that the Protoss and Terran were always stronger like very, very late game than Zerg, because you had like Raven Battlecruiser that was unbeatable for Zerg, and it still is. And the same was for Protoss. If they got to like the carriers, I mean, it didn't happen too often, but it was in some games. Again, Zerg didn't really have a lot of chances to beat that. So basically, right now Zerg is fighting against the clock to not let, especially on certain maps, like, you know, now there's like Aquilon Waste, Newkirk, when it goes to half map, you really need to try to finish your opponent before, you know, your time passes, I would say.
That's something else that is another area of balance that gets overlooked. Because like I say, the real problem with balanced discussions is that the discussion doesn't get set up in a fair way, like where we're going to look at every single thing one by one and we're going to go into detail. It's always like this one unit is imbalanced. No, it isn't. It's like that's what it always comes down to. And so another area of balance is actually maps, because obviously the map itself lends to certain units being used more than others, or certain builds being used more than others. So you can actually, like the famous example is Brood War. That's how you balance the game in Brood War, because we didn't have access to the developer because they didn't care about Brood War. So all you could do if you were the league was make different maps to give another race a chance, or to even out the win ratios or whatever. Of the current set of maps that they have right now, I talked to some pros at this tournament, and some of them told me they think, like, in general, the map pool's pretty bad. Like, there's a couple of maps that each race thinks is okay, but in general, people don't think the overall, not any race, think the overall map pool is very good. Do you agree with this? Like, what do you think the problem is with the current generation of maps?
I think they are too favored for players that basically sit in their base. I mean, we can see, like, it depends on the matchup, of course, because, you know, TVT will always be really tense unless both players go tanks and just sit in their base. But yeah, there is certain maps like Aquilon or Newkirk where you basically, you're favored if you're just sitting in your base and not a Zerg. Well, yeah, so you basically are favored if you wait in your base to get certain compositions that are, you know, that you can, I don't know, like get the economy where you're stronger really.
Okay, so actually on the topic I was talking about earlier, I want to go back to that because I forgot where I was. So when I was talking about like mindset and the sort of mindset you have to have facing opponents, I've always noticed, I don't think I've seen anyone say this very often though, that there seems to be a certain sort of mindset of good players who are foreign players, which almost hurts them when they play the better Korean players. And so you often see this with the foreign players who get a bit raged actually when they lose to lesser players, and it's because their mindset goes like this, okay, if they play a lesser player, no matter what the lesser player does, they think to themselves, well, I should beat him because I'm better than him. And so that gives them confidence to play that guy as well. And like when they beat him, they're like, well, that's what should have happened. But you can see the obvious problem there comes that when they then play a Korean, who in their own mind, they think, well, he's better than me, then they have the same problem, which is like they sort of think like, well, I probably should lose. On the subconscious level, I probably should lose to him as well. And so that's like a difficulty they have of beating those really top players. Have you ever suffered from this yourself? Because I can remember a famous example, okay, you'd been doing very well in Dreamhack Winter. You got to the semi-finals and you were going to play TaeJa. And this is one of those periods of time where everyone's like, oh, TaeJa's incredible, you know, he's a one-man army, he can beat anyone. And you got swept 3-0. Do you think there was any psychological component in you losing that series? Did he just outplay you straight up? What did you think?
It's actually hard to remind myself what maps we were playing on, but I think it's one of the cases where I would bring that up because I think I was really unsatisfied with the map pool that they used at that Dreamhack. But well, TaeJa was destroying everybody at that point. I even if I say something, I still understand that I can lose versus like on paper worse players, and I can win versus the best of the best. So I usually, you know, have kind of neutral approach to each game. But yeah, the point was with TaeJa, my mindset was also different as we played a lot of games before with TaeJa, like Clan Wars and stuff, and I lost pretty much all the games that went to macro, and I won only like Road Rush or anything like that. So that was obviously affected me.
Because another famous game that sort of went a bit like this was the one versus MVP in the final of IEM. I mean, you'd played other big names, so you'd beaten MC, you'd beaten Violet. These were people who'd won tournaments or placed very highly. Are there certain players who even though you have like quite a good mindset overall, are there certain players who like disrupt it a little bit because of past results or something? Do you ever have these issues?
I wouldn't say so really.
So you don't, has there never honestly been a series where you actually were like a psychological disadvantage or anything? There's never one that comes to mind that was a problem?
I don't think so, because I am such of a player where my attitude doesn't really affect how I do in the game. So I think that's why I was pretty consistent from the beginning of StarCraft 2 until now, because my approach to the game or what I think about balance or what I think about my opponent doesn't affect what I use. I always do my best pretty much.
Well, in general, like I say, people were like, this is one of the keys that people always praised you on, like mindset, and said like you had a very stable mindset if you played against good players. How do you think you manage in series when you've like lost maps, say you're down 0-2 or even like 1-2 or something? Do you think, are you a player who can literally like play every match as though it was separate and you don't get affected by that? Do you believe in like momentum, like if someone's beating you, then they're more likely to beat you over the series? What do you think?
I think it works. I mean, the momentum works for other players more than me. When I had a lot of series where I was down 0-2 and I came back 3-2 because being behind like that doesn't make me stressful or anything. I wouldn't also say it makes me stronger, but I think I consider myself like kind of a smart player who can adapt to opponent's playstyle. So even after I lost 2 games, I'm stronger at some points because I understand my opponent's playstyle, so I can adapt or play the way I can counter them. So maybe yeah, that's why I can come back like even from 0-2 to 3-2.
Whenever you played Brood War in the past and when you first started playing StarCraft 2, did you always have a similar mental approach to the game? Like that's another thing people describe you as. They always say like he's a very intelligent player, or the way he designs his builds is like very purposed, etc. Were you always someone whose mind approached things this way? Was it something you like decided to go towards? What do you think?
It's actually hard to say because I wasn't competitive before StarCraft 2, and when I started playing the game, it was purely like for fun. My goal was to be able to compete with the best kind of, or just play some games with them, which was ladder pretty much at that point. So I didn't really think how I would approach the game being as a pro player, but yeah, I actually use the knowledge about my opponent a lot in my games.
Well, when people talk, like we started the discussion off with talk about practice, okay, and basically the key point about practice, why I was sort of making fun a little bit of people who think it's just how many hours you put in, is it's really like how good the practice is, because obviously like 2 good hours can be better than 10 bad hours. Well, it's like a similar concept even when you're thinking about the game. Like if you're someone who just plays and doesn't really think about the game very much, then those hours aren't going to do as much for you if you're someone who can break things down. And so I even think of it in my own work, like, because I have a lot of experience like designing questions or researching people's careers, it means when I come to do the research, it's not like I know what I'm looking for, but my mind just sort of tells me roughly where to look, like that's probably where the problem's going to be, look over there. And so 1 hour for me might be like 3 hours for someone else. And so since you're saying like you can be someone who can practice less than other people, or you don't necessarily need the same sort of practice other people use, do you think you just naturally like have like a sense for StarCraft in this way, like the way you break things down? Like you must have talked to a lot of other pro players. So do you think your mind just works a little bit differently, or what do you think?
Well, yeah, I think it works like that a little bit because if I see somebody play a certain strategy, I see way things can be not maybe improved, but done in such a way that it would suit me more, let's say. So if I have a problem with something and I play against it a few times, I slowly like go, as you said, in a certain way, not really like exact answer to that, but slowly, working around the goal, I would say. So yeah, I'm such kind of a player, I guess.
In 2012, when you were at your peak, okay, and so I'm thinking of like you won Home Story, you had the great result at IEM, then you won Dreamhack Bucharest, and then even the Dreamhack Winter result was still pretty good, like semi-finals. Then after that, you had your period where you dropped off a bit, and now in Heart of the Swarm, it feels like you're still like figuring out where you even rank up. Like it's hard for everyone, it's hard to know who's good in Heart of the Swarm because you're still figuring out. But for you especially, it seems like you haven't figured out whether you're still like a top player in Europe. Do you really have the sense that if we did another interview in 6 months, will you have won a big tournament by then? What's your sense right now?
I don't know. I consider myself as a consistent player, so I don't think I will. My skill level goes down a little bit. There is also not a lot of tournaments that you can judge skill level a lot. I mean, you had like what, 4 lands maybe until since the beginning of the year. At the end of 2012, there was like mainly December. There was not a lot of tournaments for like 3-4 months. So I wouldn't call anything right now like who's worse than he was before, because it will turn out like in the next few tournaments.
Okay, so at the end, I always like to do like a hypothetical question for these grilled. So I always try to tailor it to the person though. And so for you, I wanted to do it like this, okay? So aliens come to Earth, and then they say, like, we're going to destroy the Earth unless we have like a set of exhibition matches in StarCraft 2. And so we're going to make Nerchio the captain of Team Earth, but he's not allowed to play in the matches, because you see, the matches, the only players we're allowed to play from Earth are Protoss players. And so they're going to play versus like these godlike aliens who play every single race. And so what I want you to do is pick from all of StarCraft 2 here. You can pick from any era of history, from your choice, you know. Pick the players for each of the Protoss matchups, like Korean and foreigner. So I want 6 players. And who do you pick to represent the matchups?
Let's say, yeah, I would probably pick MC for Korean Protosses, because that's pretty obvious. I would say Parting as well. That's not very surprising. And so you say like Brewer, I could choose two, or?
StarCraft 2 only.
Okay, so from Koreans, maybe I'll come back in a minute for that one. And foreigners, you would probably like me to say Frere.
For which matchup?
For matchups. So coming back to Koreans, I would say MC versus Parting versus Zerg.
Okay.
But I guess he was considered like the best versus Terran, I think. So Parting versus Zerg, MC for sure, and PZ. And then the last one, I don't know, maybe Creator. I guess that's a good pick.
Foreigners?
Foreigners. I always have problems picking foreigners, especially Protoss. But, okay, so I would go with Mana PVT, Frere PVZ.
Why for those two? Give me a reason for each.
I don't know. Actually, I saw Mana doing quite good versus all the Terrans he faced, even though those that were from Korea. And I always considered, I don't know, Frere doing very well versus Zergs, even though he might not have shown it in too many tournaments. But he didn't attend that many as well, so it's hard to judge.
So PvP?
For fun, I would say it's Elfie, because he was considered like a god in PvP in the past. But this matchup was such a conflict in the Wings of Liberty for a long time, it's really hard to say. Yeah, there was... Yeah, if it was like purely from Wings of Liberty, I would pick Elfie, but right now it would probably be someone else. The problem is I don't watch that much of PvP, so it's you know, it's hard to say. But yeah, let's go with Elfie.
Okay, do you have any final words or someone you want to thank or say hello to?
Yeah, thanks to Team Acer, all my fans that are with me, even if I lose 1 or 2 tournaments. I don't find it such a big deal, but everybody around is making it a big deal, so I guess it's important for everybody. Well, I'm not playing only 1 game a week, just to, you know, deny some accusations. And thanks a lot for the interview.
Dziękuję.
Thanks.